I need to ask a question that's going to sound rude in nature, but I promise it comes from a place of love. Gen Z, do you guys think the world started in 1997? Because the way some of y'all talk online, it's like before the first Pokemon movie, humanity was just living in caves, paying rent in berries, and getting therapy from a raccoon, all while doing interpretive dancing. Nothing existed before the internet. No mental health issues, no disease, inflation didn't exist, corruption didn't exist, loneliness didn't exist, no bad relationships, no toxic workplaces, just humans vibing in black and white photos, smiling for no reason, while eating soup and being emotionally stable.
Wait a minute. Something ain't right.
And then one day, dial up happened. And Gen Z was like, wow, the world is broken. This has never happened before.
The land of make-believe.
My friend, my sweet Wi-Fi raised child, the world has been broken. The only difference is now you can live stream the collapse in 4K while eating Takis and watching a 14-year-old explain capitalism. So today we're talking about the thing I like to call the 1997 syndrome. The belief that if it didn't happen on TikTok, it didn't happen. Look, I'm not here to bully Gen Z. I happen to like Gen Z. Gen Z is funny. They're sharp, has the best memes, and Gen Z is always somehow simultaneously exhausted, yet still willing to argue online for 6 hours straight. But Gen Z has a weird habit of talking like they're the first generation to ever struggle. And we're going to fix that today because, yes, Gen Z has real problems. But also, every generation had problems. And here's the biggest reminder we're going to repeat all video long. The other generations are still here. Millennials are still alive. Gen X is still alive. Boomers are still alive. We are also living in the world. We are also paying for eggs, and we are also watching the news. Oh, cool. Another apocalypse. Gen Z isn't suffering alone. They're just the first generation to post about it in real time with sad piano tracks. So we're going to break it down. Why Gen Z thinks nothing existed before 1997, what older generations actually went through, what Gen Z is right about, and what Gen Z is completely delusional about, why the Hard Times Olympics is ruining empathy, and what we can do to fix this generational amnesia. No intro, no fluff, just straight into it. So let's go. Why Gen Z thinks history is a rumor. Here's the truth. Gen Z grew up in a world where everything is documented. Every emotional is labeled. Every struggle is hashtagged. Every diagnosis has an infograph. So Gen Z experiences reality. If it wasn't documented, it didn't exist.
Very interesting.
But older generations didn't document their feelings, not because they didn't have them, but because society treated feelings like a weakness. If you were depressed in the past, you didn't go to therapy, you went to work. And if you cried, people were like, stop it, stop that. That's embarrassing, you're just embarrassing yourself. So Gen Z looks back and says older people didn't have mental health problems. No, older people had mental health problems so bad they turned it into cigarettes, alcohol, screaming at the TV, or silently dying at the age of 52 from stress. That was the wellness plan. That was considered self-care. So yes, Gen Z is right, mental health matters, but Gen Z is wrong to assume older people were fine. Older people weren't fine, they were just quiet, and the silent looks like peace to someone who grew up online. Every generation plays the Hard Times Olympics. Gen Z says nobody has ever struggled like this. Boomer says you're soft. Millennials say, I've been financially destroyed 3 times. While Gen X is sitting there saying, I don't care, leave me alone. Great. Now I need a drink. Where the hell is the garden hose? And the silent generation just stares into the distance because they survived the Great Depression and World War II and don't have the energy for your whining. But suffering isn't a contest. Pain isn't a leaderboard. And if we keep treating pain like a competition, we destroy empathy. And when empathy dies, the people in charge love it. Because if we're busy fighting each other, we're not paying attention to the fact that the system is rigged. Generational warfare is basically a distraction technique. It's the oldest trick in the book. Hey, poor people, blame other poor people. And it works every time. Gen Z talks like the world is collapsing, and honestly, they're not wrong, but they talk like older generations are watching the collapse from a VIP lounge, like, wow, that's crazy, man. Anyways, I'm fine. No, we're all here. We're all living this. The inflation is hitting everybody. The culture wars are hitting everybody. The job market is hitting everybody. The loneliness is hitting everybody. Millennials aren't chilling. Millennials are out there. I'm 34 and I'm tired. My back hurts. My rent is $2,400 a month and my student loan is still haunting me like a demon. Gen X is quietly spiraling and saying, I'll just rub some fucking dirt on it and it'll be okay. Boomers are looking at grocery receipts. Why is a bag of grapes a luxury item? Also, while we're at it, why do all the names in my address book seem to end in MD these days? So, yes, Gen Z has unique pressures, but they are not suffering alone. They are suffering loudly. Big difference. Gen Z talks about inflation was invented during COVID by a guy in a suit named Brent. Bro, everything is so expensive now. Yes, correct, but inflation has been humbling people for a long time. In the 1970s and early 80s, inflation was so bad, it basically made people feel like the economy was possessed. Gas shortages, which caused lines at the gas stations, and mortgage rates, not 6%, more like 15%. That's not a mortgage, that's a damn ransom note. So yes, houses were cheaper in sticker price, but financing that house felt like you were buying a home using a credit card with demon interest. So older generations didn't live in an easy economy, they lived in a different kind of mess. Every generation gets wrecked. The economy just changes its weapon. Gen Z thinks boomers were all rich. Boomers were buying a house at 22, raising a family, and retiring at 50. And some did, but not everyone. And also, boomers had stability in a way we don't now. Back then, the economy rewarded loyalty. You could work somewhere for 20 years and retire. Now, you can work somewhere for 20 years and still get laid off because the spreadsheet decided you were redundant. So yes, Gen Z is right, stability is gone, but older generations weren't living in paradise, they were just dealing with different problems. They had fewer work protections, more workplace abuse, less safety, less mental health awareness, and more shut up and take it. You think your boss is toxic now? Back then your boss could be toxic and smoke indoors. He'd be yelling at you with a cigarette in his mouth like a cartoon villain. Oh, and the silent generation, you want to talk toxic work environment? If they had the boss over for dinner and the boss didn't like it, they could fire them. That's the reality they lived in. And HR didn't exist. HR was Gary. Gary hates feelings, hates women, and he hates you. Gen Z says work culture is broke. Yes, it is. But exploitation is not new. Older generations got exploited too. They just didn't call it exploitation. They called it having a job. The difference is Gen Z is more willing to say no, and I'll give them credit for that because older generations were taught be grateful, shut up, take the abuse, you should feel lucky that you have a job. So Gen Z's attitude around boundaries, good. But Gen Z needs to understand your parents and grandparents weren't living easy. They were just forced to tolerate nonsense. And that tolerance did not make them healthier, it made them repressed. And then they would pass that vibe down. Now, mental health. Gen Z talks like mental illness is a modern epidemic. No, mental health is ancient. People were depressed in ancient times. They just didn't call it depression. They called it melancholy, or the vapors, or possessed, which honestly is relatable. Because some of y'all's anxiety does feel like a demon. But here's the key. Older generations didn't talk about mental health issues because it was taboo. Men especially were taught feelings our weakness.
This is our handbook. I wrote the whole thing myself.
So they didn't process feelings. They buried them. Then they took it out on their family, their body, addictions, rage, workaholicism. So when Gen Z says nobody had anxiety before now, no, older generations had anxiety so bad they were chain smoking their way through adulthood like it was a cardio program. And yes, Gen Z is right to normalize therapy. But Gen Z also sometimes makes mental health their entire identity. I'm anxious. But are you anxious, or are you a human being living in a stressful society? Not everything is trauma. Sometimes things are just uncomfortable, and discomfort is not damage. Discomfort is growth. You can acknowledge your feelings without turning them into your personality. Because if you label every inconvenience as trauma, you become fragile. Not because you're weak, but because you trained your brain to treat discomfort like danger. We need balance. Older generations did repression. Gen Z's does hyper awareness. Both extremes are unhealthy. Gen Z also talks like bad parenting is new. Nobody had a childhood trauma until someone learned the phrase generational trauma. Bad parenting has existed forever. Historically, parenting was basically try not to die. That was the goal. A lot of people grew up with emotionally absent parents, or abusive parents, or parents who were loving but overwhelmed, or parents who were doing their best with zero tools. Because back then, parenting advice was basically yell. If that doesn't work, yell louder. That was the book. So yes, Gen Z is right to call out bad parenting, but it didn't start in 1997. It's been around since humans learned how to reproduce. The difference is Gen Z can name it. Older generations just said, my dad was hard on me. No, your dad was emotionally unavailable and terrified of intimacy. Parents had to be reminded at 10 p.m. they actually had kids. Gen Z thinks toxic relationships started with dating apps. No, toxic relationships existed before Tinder. People used to meet in real life and still seem to pick the worst option. Humans have always had the ability to see red flags and go, but I can fix them. This is timeless. The difference is now we have more options, more temptation, and more comparison. So relationships feel harder and loneliness is real, but don't let that trick you into thinking love was easy in the past. In the past, a lot of people stayed married because divorce was shameful and women couldn't survive financially. So the past wasn't better relationships. It was often just quiet suffering with a ring. So again, different problems, same human mess. Gen Z's talk about loneliness. It's new. Loneliness is not new. What's new is being lonely while surrounded by people online. That's the uniquely modern torture. Older generations could be lonely too, but they had more forced communities. Neighborhoods, clubs, churches, unions, local events, third places. Now we have fewer third places and more screens. So Gen Z has a point, but remember, millennials, Gen X, and boomers are also lonely now too. The loneliness epidemic isn't Gen Z's private property, it's everyone. It's the whole country, the whole world. We all got isolated. We all got automatized. We all got turned into little consumer pods. So yes, Gen Z feels lonely. So does your mom. So does your dad. So does your neighbor. We're all living in the same modern social collapse. Gen Z experienced COVID and thought, this is unprecedented. COVID was serious, yes, but humanity has been getting wrecked by diseases forever. We had smallpox, we had polio, tuberculosis, Spanish flu, measles, HIV/AIDS, and diseases that sound like medieval curses, like consumption. Bro, what do you mean consumption? That sounds like a demon. Back then, you didn't recover, you pretty much died. It was like a turbocharged version of tuberculosis. Medicine wasn't what it is now. So yes, COVID was traumatic, but it wasn't the first time people lived through a pandemic. It was just the first time people had to do it while also arguing with strangers on the internet about it, which honestly might be worse. And remember, there was the bubonic plague, so we'll just leave it at that with the Black Death. Gen Z looks at global conflict and says the world is terrifying. Yes, it is, but older generations grew up under the constant fear of nuclear war. The Cold War was basically, any day now we might all explode. And that was a normal Tuesday. Boomers and Gen X lived with that. And before that, World War II. Before that, the Great Depression. Before that, World War I. So the world being scary isn't new. What's new is you can't escape it because you carry the apocalypse in your pocket. Notifications, breaking news, doom scroll, and just repeat. So your nervous system never rests. That's real. That's a modern problem. But again, everyone is living this now, not just Gen Z. Your mom is doom scrolling too. Your dad is doom scrolling too. He's just doing it on Facebook with a profile picture of a fish. Social media is the main reason Gen Z feels like the world is collapsing, because social media feeds you fear. It doesn't show you stable communities, quiet progress, normal days, boring stability. It shows you outrage, war, trauma, inequality, panic, conflict, and someone crying in their car. And sometimes it's real, sometimes it's important, but if that's all you see, you start thinking the world is only suffering. And then you start thinking nobody has ever lived like this. But they have. They just didn't see it 24/7. Humans are not designed to emotionally process the entire planet's suffering in every day. Your brain is not supposed to know about 40 tragedies before breakfast. That's why Gen Z's anxiety is so intense. And by the way, that's why everyone's anxiety is intense now. Because boomers are on social media too. Millennials are on social media too. The Gen X crew, yep, they're on social media too. We're all getting cooked by the same algorithm. Different generations, same frying pan. Gen Z sometimes has main character syndrome. Not always, but sometimes. They talk like, I'm the only one who sees reality. No, we all see it. We're all living in it. The difference is older people have bills and back pain and can't emotionally afford to spiral publicly. Gen Z spirals publicly because it's normalized. And again, not a moral judgment, just a cultural difference. But we need Gen Z to understand. You are not alone in this. Everybody is struggling and everybody is stressed. We're all just trying to survive. You're not fighting the apocalypse solo. We're all here and we're all tired. Now, let me be fair. Gen Z is right about a lot. Housing is broken, wages have stagnated, healthcare is insane, college is way overpriced, and corporate greed is out of control. Politicians are disconnected, mental health deserves attention, boundaries matter, and the future feels uncertain. Gen Z is correct, but here's what I need Gen Z to stop doing. Stop acting like older generations are your enemy, because most older people are also struggling. They're not the ones running the system, they're just trapped in it. Your enemy isn't the random 50-year-old who is also broken. Your enemy is the machine that keeps everyone stressed, divided, and exhausted. Gen Z believes the past was easy, and no, the past was brutal. It just looked calm because the photos were black and white and everyone was posing for 12 minutes. They weren't calm, and also, let's be honest, the past had way less awareness, which means people suffered in silence. That's not better. That is just hidden pain. So Gen Z needs historical context. Not so they stop complaining, but so they stop feeling hopeless. Because if you realize humans have faced chaos before, you realize we can fix things again. Here's what we do. Number 1, teach real history, not just wars and presidents. Teach economic history, social histories, what life was actually like. Number 2, older generations need to admit their struggles. Stop pretending you just worked harder. No, you worked hard and you got advantages and you got screwed in other ways. So just tell the truth about it. Number 3, stop the hard times Olympics. Pain is not a contest. Number 4, teach resilience without dismissing feelings. Older generations dismiss emotion. Gen Z sometimes worships emotions. We need balance. Number 5, stop letting social media define your reality. It's cooking everybody's brain. Gen Z isn't alone. We're all being fried. Gen Z, I love you. But the world did not start in 1997. Human suffering did not begin when SpongeBob premiered. The world has always been a mess. The difference is now it's recorded, and you're not crazy for feeling overwhelmed, but you need to remember, millennials are still here, boomers are still here, the silent generation is still here. We're all living in this mess too. We're all paying for groceries. We're all watching the news. Oh, cool, another damn apocalypse. So don't waste your energy acting like nobody understands. We understand. We're just tired. And we'd really like you to stop acting like we were all living in the Stone Age until you showed up and iPhone and trauma vocabulary. Because you're not alone. You're not doomed. You're just human. Welcome to the species. It's been a mess the whole time. So if you're a Gen Z, what's one thing older generations do that drives you completely insane? Without mentioning driving. And if you're older, what's one struggle you dealt with that younger people never talk about? Let's actually talk like adults, because we're not enemies here. Generations aren't all enemies. We're just different generations getting wrecked by the same system, just in different fonts.